hearts anew. We long to know you more. Come, Spirit, lead us deeper into truth.
Well, welcome again to a new week, and a week where we have the opportunity to spend some time together just focusing on this amazing story that Luke has provided for us, the story of the early church. The church is on this great adventure. It's very exciting, it's very challenging, there are tough times, and of course there are joyful times, as is the story of any church. So we're continuing this journey during this week and following through, beginning towards the end of Acts chapter 12. And I'll read some of that for you in a moment. I guess as we look back on our lives, we would be able to identify on a national or international level significant events that have brought about significant change. We might think about something like the time that Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and of course the resulting seismic changes that took place in South Africa. We might think of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the way that Europe was transformed and reshaped at that time. We might even think about the downfall and the eventual execution of Saddam Hussein. These are significant events that brought about significant change. Of course, sometimes for good, but not always for good in that sense. Today's passage brings us to a point where we see a significant event which brings about significant change. Let me read Acts chapter 12 and verses 19, the second part of verse 19, through to verse 25. Then Herod went up from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. He'd been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon. They now joined together and sought an audience with him. Having secured the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a god, not a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of the Lord continued to increase and spread. When Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. There can be no doubt that the death of Herod Agrippa was one of those moments, a moment where we see a significant event bringing about significant change. The Herodian family, of course, had a very long history of involvement in the Christian story, right from the birth of Jesus, right through, as Luke is telling us now, to the mission of the early church. The Herod that we're introduced to here is Herod Agrippa, also known simply as Herod in this passage, or Agrippa the First. He was king of Judea from around 41 to 44 AD. He was the last of the Herodians that really had a royal title. His son, Herod Agrippa II, followed on, but by no means was of any great significance. By that time, the influence of the Herodian dynasty had faded significantly. Herod Agrippa was the grandson of Herod the Great, and he ruled over an area that we could describe as being very similar to the geographical expression of modern Israel today. We're told that Herod Agrippa was a persecutor of the church in Jerusalem. We know that he had James, the son of Zebedee, killed, and he was involved in the imprisonment of Peter around the time of Passover, as we've already seen. Agrippa proved to be a thorn in the side of the Christian church and its mission. He was a staunch opponent of the church, not through conviction, but through expediency. He was prepared to do anything that would court the favor of others and secure his own position. His death, as it's described here, was very gruesome. History tells us that it took 5 days for him to die, and it's believed that he died from heart pains and abdomen pains. So it's quite a gruesome end to his life in that sense. What Luke wants to tell us here is that here we have a man who had been a staunch opponent for reasons of his own against the church and the mission of the church. But more than that, he had reached a point in his life where he began to take that role of considering himself to be divine. He was, in other words, trying to play God. Like so many tyrants before him and after him, he needed those around him who relied on him, I guess, for their own positions and their own provisions, not only to appease him, but to elevate him beyond his obvious humanity to a place of divinity. And of course, as we find here, as Luke tells us, they declared he was more than a human, but he was God. And Herod allowed that to happen, even though everything about his own Jewish culture and religion declared that there was only one true God. This clearly then was an act of blasphemy. Blasphemy both against God, but of course the work of the Holy Spirit. Herod fell into that trap of playing God, and it's a dangerous game. And yet it's clear throughout history and right up to the present that many continue to try. From the Egyptian pharaohs through to the mini-gods of this present age, people who believe that they have the right to control the destiny of others, that they are sovereign in themselves and in their institutions, even sometimes in their forms of government. The outcome, of course, of this measure, this level of arrogance, is inevitable, as we see here. And Herod Agrippa is removed from his seat, from his throne, from his perceived position of authority and power, and his own estimate and the estimate of those around him that he was more than a man, that this was indeed a God. And what we find here is his death marks a significant moment that brings about significant change. And Luke is very keen to tell us that this opens up the possibility of a second wave of Christian mission. Herod is removed from his throne, and of course that meant that the church then could continue to proclaim that there is only one throne and there is only one king. And of course that king is Jesus. He truly is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I guess in a world of mini gods, it's good for us to personally examine our hearts before God, to ensure that we've not fallen into the trap of trying to control the lives of others, to get beyond that place where we know who we are, to a place where we begin to take on some of the labels or the estimations that others may be making of us. It's time to take an opportunity today to remain servant-hearted and humble before the Lord our God.
We come to hear your word. Lord, open up our hearts and lives again. So let your voice be heard. We're ready to receive this daily bread. Your word is truth and life to us. So light the way as we believe your promises. Renew our faith. Your word is truth and life to us. So light the way as we believe your promises. Renew our faith. We come to hear your word. Let revelation shape our hearts anew. We long to know you more. Come, Spirit, lead us deeper into truth. We long to know you more. Come, Spirit, lead us deeper